I think that's wrong because we're the ones obsessed with the afterlife, not Jesus. Let me say that again. It's not a popular point of view in Christian circles. We are the ones obsessed with who's going to heaven, who's going to hell, what's heaven look like, where is hell, who's in heaven, who's in hell, how do you get to heaven, how do you miss hell, if you go to hell, can you ever get to heaven, what if you were in heaven, could you ever visit hell, what did Jesus do when he went to hell, was Jesus waiting for me in heaven, what is heaven on earth, is that possible, what is hell in my life, and man, we talk about heaven and heaven and hell day and night, we put it literal, we put it spiritual, we put it allegorical, we put it metaphorical, we put it out in the future. It's exhausting, man. There's a book written on both of them all the time that's coming out. Somebody's always seeing heaven, somebody's seeing hell, 22 minutes in hell, 18 minutes in heaven, how to miss one, how to go to the other, and stuff that's not in the Bible. In fact, almost none of what you're reading and none of what you're hearing is actually in the Word. And it's remarkable when you start to study your Bible, namely the Old Testament, they don't even have a real solid theology of the afterlife in the Old Testament. And this is Torah. I mean, this is the foundation of what ends up being biblical thought, and there's no real talk about what happens when we die. Then comes Jesus, and for some reason we think Jesus starts talking a lot about it. Like Jesus is always talking about what happens when you die. And maybe we've just misunderstood what Jesus is trying to do. And it's not, perhaps, that Jesus is obsessed with talking to people about where they're going. Maybe Jesus keeps talking to people about where they are. And maybe instead of talking to people about where they could go when they die, Jesus is talking to people about what they could have in this life if they would die to the things they know. And you say, well, how do you know that's true? Because Jesus wouldn't shut up about the kingdom. And when he was asked about it, it was always invisible. You couldn't touch it, you couldn't taste it, you couldn't see it. And yet he believed it was so real that when he sent his disciples out, he told them, don't preach heaven and hell. Don't preach angels and demons. Preach the kingdom. And you and I would go, if we were in their shoes, we'd go, well, I don't know, what am I supposed to say? But they understood what it meant. And what they understood it to mean is, hey, good news. The king has come. And his kingdom's here. And you can get in. And that's not, hey, good news. You can go to heaven when you die. And somewhere along the way, our message became, hey, good news, you can go to heaven when you die. When their message was, hey, good news, the king's here. And you don't have to live beneath whatever this is. You don't have to fall beneath the systems of this world. You can exist within the kingdom, and let me show you what some of that kingdom looks like. So everywhere Jesus goes, now watch Jesus work, and you start to see Jesus as a spreader of the kingdom. He's healing people, he's showing the kingdom. He's loving people, he's showing the kingdom. He's feeding people, he's showing the kingdom. Everywhere he goes, kingdom, kingdom, kingdom. And people around him, even the religious hierarchy is going, whoa, what? When are we going to know the kingdom's here? And he goes, the kingdom's not going to be something you can see. The kingdom's going to be something in the midst of you. It's going to be something that explodes out of you. He goes, by the way, it's going to be like a woman takes yeast and drops it in bread. He goes, she doesn't need a lot, just a little bit. And he goes, and then the bread explodes. He goes, but don't get too excited. The kingdom's also like a guy that puts a seed in the ground, then goes to bed, wakes up the next day, and the seed's still in the ground. And he goes to bed, and he wakes up the next day, and the seed's still in the ground. And he goes to bed, and he wakes up the next day, and the seed... Jesus doesn't say it that many ways, but by his repetition, you can tell that's what Jesus is saying. And he says, it grows even though he doesn't know how. And he goes, oh, but don't think it's fast, because the kingdom is like a seed. And you drop it in the ground, and someday it becomes a big tree so that all the birds of the air can rest in its branches. In other words, it's not quick, but it's huge. And it's not always obvious, but it's working. And that's the message that Jesus is giving. Now, if you will approach the statements of Jesus through that lens, you won't have to justify which ones you get to embrace. You'll realize that a lot of the reasons we're rejecting some of the Jesus verses is that we think Jesus is talking about stuff we talk about, when in reality he's talking about something different entirely. So for us, straight as the gate, narrow as the way, man, there's only one way to get to heaven. There's a broad way to get to hell. A bunch of people going to hell, a few people going to heaven. There's only one way to get to heaven. The man's name is Jesus.